Hello everyone and welcome back. So let's continue and let's work on the fire now. So we need a fire shader. So let's create an Arnold node and call this fire preview. I'm gonna dive inside and create a volume, a standard volume, and the output is gonna go into the volume. And let's go back here and assign this, and it's called fire. Let's type in fire. I'm going to copy this and paste it on all the other nodes. And for now, I'm going to cut these, put them here, and we need the fire promo. I don't know why I called it promo. I guess I was working on the promo video. That's why. And I'm going to do a render. Now everything is going to be excluded except the fire. And it should be relatively quick to get a preview of that. Okay, so this is our fire, and right now it's rendering the density field, which is not designed for this use. So we don't need density. I'm gonna set this to 0. I only need the fire, and right away we're getting decent result. Like, I'm not doing anything at all. This is the first test, so I actually like this. I don't think I'm gonna change anything, and I only need emission, which is coming off of the temperature. We could try flame as well, which has different information, but for the final use case we're gonna use a mixture of both. For now I'm gonna use fire only. So let's lower the intensity a bit. Okay, so that's our fire. And let's go back here and include the fire promo star and hit render. And because this fire has a lot of geometry that occludes it, we have to include that in these tests. Otherwise we won't be able to tell what kind of visual we're getting. So I'm going to cut these RBD core and outer, which is the destruction. I'm going to set them as forced matte, and let's template this, or let's snapshot the fire and hit render again. And let's wait for it. Now, because of the RBD pieces, the RBD core is quite heavy, so it takes some time for it to load. There it is. So the difference is big between these two. So we always have to make sure that the fire is being masked correctly, because it's actually coming from underneath the geometry, and this is what it needs to look like. So from this we can see right away that there is one visual element that is missing a lot. And if we look at these 4 lights, they're not contributing to the fire, and this is good because we don't want the fire to be illuminated. It's self-illuminating. So for the in here I'm gonna say exclude lights. I don't need any light, and I'm gonna go and move this from forced matte to actually include the geometry. I want this to be here. I want the RBD geometry to be available. So I'm gonna hit render, and right now we only have the fire as a source, and this visual interaction is very, very important in selling the final visual. So we have to make sure that our fire is properly illuminating the geometry around it. And so we're going to do a test and see how that looks, and see if we need to do any adjustments for this. So it's still exporting the geometry, and there it is. This is we didn't cache it, but you can see it here. Okay, so one element that we need is the volume, is the diffuse indirect. So I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna tick on diffuse indirect, and that should propagate. I'm gonna also include the specular indirect because there is a specular component on the rocks, so it's also reflective. And just to cover everything, I'm gonna include direct lighting and indirect lighting, and also volume, direct, volume indirect, and then emission. And we're gonna cover this more in the next videos. So let's do a quick render. Right now we have this fire illumination. I'm gonna use volume scattering on this. So I'm gonna set this to 1. I don't need the specular reflection in this pass. And let me copy this, call this look dev fire. And I don't need fire reflection, the specular reflection. I'm gonna use 2 bounces here. I want the fire to bounce quite a bit. And I'm gonna use the adaptive sampling, so I'm gonna say 7 and 3, and adaptive threshold is 0.1. And for the diffuse, I'm gonna set this to 4, I'm gonna set this to 3, and let's go to the look dev fire and hit render. And now we're gonna see the fire element. And my idea for this stage is I'm not gonna render all the elements together. I'm not gonna balance any of that at this state. I need to get one decent pass for the fire, one decent pass for the smoke, and then everything else, which is the environment. And in our case, we're going to end up rendering the smoke elements in two parts, and I will talk about that in a bit. So this is the render. And it's working. And you can see the illumination here and everything. So this is one pass that I will do. And we're getting some really nice shadowing, some really nice illumination here, and this is like the default of everything, so I haven't done anything. And then we have the indirect, obviously, the diffuse indirect, and this will allow us to gain if the light illumination if we wanted to. And then because this is only emissive, the emission AUV will only contain the fire, and I will talk about this more when we get to nuke. So pretty happy with this. This is solid. I'm gonna call this AA look dev main beauty, which we have to tweak again. This is for the RBD core, and then this is going to be for the smoke. So for the smoke, we're going to create a shader as well. So let's go to the fire preview and call this smoke preview. And we don't need any temperature or anything for this material. Smoke preview. I'm gonna paste the path, and then I'm gonna create a pass for just this. So let's put here, I'm gonna use one element only. I'm gonna cut this, make sure I have it's all in the exclude list, and this is going to be smoke new cracks. That's the first one, and let's hit render. Make sure we're selecting the correct one. So fire, this is smoke, and let's hit render. Now it's gonna render black because I excluded all the lights, and we need to change the candidate lights to include everything. So let's hit render again. And this is my smoke. So let's go to the shader and tweak it. And for this one, we obviously need density, so I'm gonna set this to 1. I'm gonna set this to 0, and this is my smoke pass. And let's look at it from the various lights. So that's 1, 2, and I think it's very dense, so I'm gonna lower the density to 0.4. and I'm gonna change the phase or to be more anisotropic, so it's illuminating around the edges more and the core is dark. And this is something I want because I know the fire is gonna be inside and it's gonna illuminate everything here. So to that's it. This is all there is for the smoke. Maybe let's increase this to 3. And this is all I'm gonna do for this element. Now we need the illumination of this smoke on top of the beauty pass because we want the shadows to be cast. So here I'm gonna copy this and I'm gonna go to the beauty pass. I'm gonna say forced phantom, and this is all the elements I need, and I don't need the fire here, and that's the RBD, and this is what's gonna cast shadows on top of it. Okay, the other thing we want is we want this smoke to be illuminated by the fire. So I'm gonna copy the fire pass name, I'm gonna go to the smoke and say forced phantom, and let's hit play, let's hit render. So what's gonna happen is the fire is going to be present in this pass as part of the phantom, but right now because it's in the exclude list, it's not being included. So let's do that again. And what we're going to see is we're going to get the illumination of the fire inside the smoke. Okay, so that's what we want. But because the fire doesn't receive lights at all, it's much better to include it also in the beauty pass. So with this pass, we're going to have the fire included inside the smoke. And this way we're going to get both. We're going to get the illumination of the smoke affecting, and we have our fire. Now for this pass, I don't need the diffuse, I don't need the specular or anything. I just need the indirect illumination, the volume scattering on. I'm going to use 2 passes, and I'm going to make sure that I have enough samples here. And let's go back. I'm going to include all the smoke elements and then the fire elements. And if we look at the volume indirect, we should see the fire illuminating the smoke itself, which is quite cool. Okay, so that's one pass. Don't worry about the blue color, okay? Don't worry about that. Okay, so we have this. We have the fire, the smoke casting shadows on top of the RBD pass, and we have the fire. Now, if we go back here and hit render, at this point, it does not make sense to have the fire visible because we don't need it in this pass. We only need the fire illumination onto the geometry. So I'm going to change the name of this and call it fire illum. And I only need the fire illumination onto the geometry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this fire promo into phantom, and that way it's not going to be visible to the camera, but it's going to affect and emit light onto the geometry. So let's hit render. And for this pass, even though the smoke is going to be occluding this, I still want the information. I still want the fire to illuminate the geometry without considering the smoke presence. Okay, because if we include the smoke, then it's going to occlude a lot of the sourcing onto the geometry from the fire. I don't want that. I want the fire to the geometry right away. And this is personal decision. Again, I just want that cool illumination to be unaffected by the smoke. Okay, so this is the pass we need, and that's really it. The next part is to check. So let's do that now. The next part is to check. Let's call this main check. The next part is to check for the other elements. So I'm gonna copy this and paste it here, and cut this and paste it here, and I'm gonna test the spaceship, and then the RBD, both of these elements. And if everything renders correctly, I'm just gonna update the beauty pass, make sure all that geometry is included correctly in these 3 passes. We're gonna save them to disk, and then we're gonna do some compositing. So let's hit render, and then we'll continue in the next video. Thank you guys for watching, and see you in a bit.